you become a fan. You're like watching all these guys, interested in all these guys. How did you decide? What made you decide this is what I want to get into?
That came actually way later in life. That's the funny part because it was always something that was in the back of my head. You know what I mean? I was kind of involved a little bit musically with music and stuff like that, but nothing ever came of it. I had a radio show for a short time on college radio, which I enjoyed doing. But however, my partner that had the connection with the radio station eventually moved off because he to California because he was involved heavily with the music industry and then got a job out in California. So then the show kind of died. I think it was 2019 actually that I started to look into getting back into radio as like just doing a music show, and I was going to try like public outlets, community radio, something like that. And then it's like I'll just maybe I'll just decide to do a podcast instead. And then one day, and I had actually there's probably a period for about 2 years that I stopped watching wrestling, believe it or not, around that time period, probably like 2017 ish. But it was a chance running into on my way to work one morning. I used to stop at this gas station, grab a cup of coffee, etc., and breakfast along the way. I ran into Paul Roma from Power and Glory, Young Stallions, WWF, WCW superstar. And he and I had some mutual friends, and I had spoken with him. He invited me. He runs a school out here. Him and Mario Mancini run a wrestling school out here, and they have a promotion that coincides with that promotion or with the school. And I ran into him. He invited me down, and I walked into that building for their next show. And I ran into a good buddy of mine, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, who I had not seen in probably 20 years, who was a manager up in this northeastern part of the United States. And he's done some great things. And but we started talking, and then eventually I started just going to shows constantly. It was the first time I had been to so many shows in such a long time. You know what I mean? I was
Really?
going to shows basically on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, something like that. And then I just eventually just little by little started getting involved. And then a couple of my friends, I did a couple commentary gigs for that company, probably a couple matches here and there, and they went pretty well. But then a couple of my friends were restarting a company that they had run in New York called Empire Pro Wrestling. Nick and Hakim, the House of Pain, and they had contacted me and said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to do commentary. Would you be interested?" I said, "Absolutely." And then I had been doing the podcast for a few years. I had interviewed a lot of guys out of New England, some legends, and eventually that's what just led into me from podcasting to being involved in the professional wrestling industry. And it's just I've had an amazing probably 5 or so years doing this, just meeting so many great people. And then we had this amazing event last night, which I guess we'll get into a little bit later, that I'd love to put over to you guys. So that's what kind of led to me to actually get into the wrestling industry.
Wow, it's amazing with your radio background. You were doing that for a long time, and all goes hand to hand. I mean, it's still a part. What a lot of people don't know is like the radio podcasting world, and you in making that transition. It's all part of that broadcasting
Yes, 100%.
circles.
Yeah.
So
And when I was doing radio, like podcasting was literally in its infancy. There was like now it seems like everybody and their mother has a podcast. So, I mean, not that that's a bad thing, because there's one thing. It's like anytime I run into somebody, it's like, "Hey, I've been thinking about starting a podcast." It's like, "Hey, I'll help you get off the ground." Or I always encourage people that if they say they want to do it, become a content creator, I always try to encourage them and try to give them a hand and help them, because it's like I know what it was like when I decided that I was just going to do a podcast, and then it was going to be a music one. Then I said, forget it. I was just going to do something wrestling related, because I said full blown got into wrestling. And it's just it took me a long time to sell myself to a lot of these guys. You know what I mean? But it was because of like people such as Nick and Hakim and the Guardian of Chaos and Mario Mancini that I was able to prove myself, because those guys gave me chances, and those guys would actually put me over, especially Mario. If somebody doesn't know who I am, they usually ask him. I'm not sure. You're familiar with Mario
I've heard,
Mancini?
yeah, I've heard, yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely have heard of him.
Yep. He was a preliminary wrestler for WWF, and I think it was 84 to 92, I believe.
Hmm.
And he a tremendous human being, but there's a couple guys that had no idea who I was, but they saw that I was friends with Mario. They asked him, he'd always say, "Hey man, this guy's good." I don't take cheap shots at anybody's careers or any of that kind of stuff. So I just want to, part of my goal is to just get an interesting story out there and share the memories, I guess you could say.